Hi everyone, my name is Rachel Sorenson. This is Victoria Warnet, and we're going to talk to you about our study today entitled An Investigation of Secondary School Ensembles for Students with Special Needs. To start with our related literature, with the passage of the Education for All Handicapped Children Act in 1975, students with identified disabilities in the U.S. were guaranteed a free and appropriate public education through the school district in which they lived. In 1990, this became the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, or IDEA. Some of the hallmarks of this legislation are an individualized education plan, or IEP, for all students with special needs and access to the least restrictive environment possible. To talk a little bit about inclusion, inclusion is an attempt to educate students with special needs in the least restrictive learning environment. There has been an increased emphasis on inclusion, which refers to the incorporation of students with special needs into the mainstream classroom to the fullest extent possible. In a fully inclusive environment, students with varying abilities are educated by teachers who adjust and modify instruction based on the individual needs of students. Historically, undergraduate programs have not been required to provide instruction related to teaching special learners. Therefore, many teachers have felt unprepared in this area. However, more institutions are now offering music education degrees that do require coursework and fieldwork to prepare pre-service teachers to work with special learners. There are a couple of big challenges with inclusion. The first one being is providing instruction broad enough to address the needs of all students and having the capability to evaluate everyone's abilities fairly. Some tools for improving inclusion in a general sense are using differentiated instruction and universal design for learning, and providing special learners with additional cues, frequent reinforcement, extra response time, and hands-on experiences.
Some tools for improving inclusion in the music classroom include adapting instruments, using step-by-step sequences, using easy instructions, structured environment, and predictable routines, and fine and gross motor skill activation. Although there is ample research on the different types of modifications and adaptations and effective teaching strategies that can be made in the music classroom, not much research has been done in terms of investigating actual secondary ensembles that exist for students with special needs. Therefore, the purpose of the study was to investigate the nature of ensembles for students with special needs with regard to preparation for working with students with special needs, as well as details related to curriculum development and ensemble characteristics. Our research questions were: number one, what is the nature of musical ensembles for students with special needs? For instance, class size, meeting time, instrumentation, and performances. Number two, what type of pre-service and in-service training, if any, did music teachers receive with regard to instruction of students with special needs? Number three, what types of curricular materials were used in these ensembles and how are they developed? And number four, what type of support did teachers receive in the form of paraprofessional and peer mentoring?
Okay, to go into our method, we started with a researcher-designed survey, which we pilot tested with 13 music educators. We then made modifications based on that pilot test, such as refinement of demographic questions and consolidation of list items based on emergent themes from participant responses. Okay, and our survey consisted of 5 sections. The first section was a demographic section. Then we asked them about their preparation to work with students with special needs, both in a general sense and music specific. Then we asked them about the nature and design of their ensembles, such as instruments and types of instructional materials used, frequency and time of rehearsals, and the ensemble size. And then we also asked them about support in the terms of paraprofessionals or peer mentors that they have in the classroom. And then the last section asked them about the nature of their public performances that they had with their ensembles, if they chose to have public performances at all. So in terms of our survey distribution, we emailed secondary music teachers in the state of Florida due to our history and familiarity working in that state. And we also posted it on various social media pages for music educators, ones around the state, ones around the country, and ones geared specifically towards working with students with special needs. We sent out reminder emails after 2 weeks, and we did the same thing with the postings on the social media sites. And then we ended up collecting data for 3 weeks. So this is the demographic information we collected in terms of our participants. 21 people ended up completing the survey, teachers in the United States, and they all taught at least one class that was dedicated to students with special needs. And as you can see from the graphs, most of the instructors were middle school teachers, and then high school, and then a few taught both. And then in terms of teaching experience, most teachers have between 6 and 10 years of teaching experience, although some teachers had as little as 1 to 5, and some also had 16 to 20 or 20 years plus of teaching experience.
So our first research question, what was the nature of the musical ensembles for students with special needs in terms of class size, meeting time, instrumentation, and performances? We found the class size ranged variously between the ensembles, with most ensembles having between 1 and 10 members, but other ensembles having more than 30 members. The meeting times were primarily in a dedicated class period, although there were a few that met during lunch or as an extracurricular activity. As far as instrumentation goes, most of them were all instrumental or a combination of instrumental and voice. A few were vocal only, and there were some that were listed other, that listed that they were mostly dancing to music and that type of thing. In terms of the types of instruments that were used, it was primarily percussion instruments, both pitched and non-pitched, but as you can see, there were various other instruments that were used in all of the classes. In terms of the performances per year, a lot of groups didn't have any performances at all, with many listing that they had 1, 2, or more than 3 performances. There were even a few ensembles that said that it varies per year and depends on the students in the ensemble. Our second research question was, what type of pre-service and in-service training, if any, did music teachers receive with regard to the instruction of students with special needs? As you can see, a lot of people received training in a general sense in undergrad. A few did not receive most didn't receive music-specific training, and many sought out training in terms of in-service trainings or professional development once they were already teaching. Our third research question, what type of curricular materials were used in these ensembles and how were they developed? As you can see, there were various types of instructional materials: sheet music, manipulatives, online materials, lead sheets, orphan codai, and method books were all listed as being used in the classes. And in terms of how these materials were developed, most of them were self-developed, with a few coming from online resources. A couple teachers mentioned that these were already available at their school when they arrived there. Others purchased them, and others acquired them in different means. When it came to funding, a lot of the funding was provided by the school budget, or a budget from an existing ensemble, such as band, choir, or orchestra. Some of the teachers also funded these ensembles out of their own pockets, as well as using grants, donations, and student fees. Our fourth research question was, what type of support did teachers receive in the form of paraprofessional and peer mentoring? And many of the ensembles had paraprofessionals in them. As you could see, most had at least one paraprofessional present, although there were a few that had no paraprofessionals available to them. When it came to peer mentors, many of the ensembles did not use peer mentors, but others utilized them in terms of 1 to 5 per class, 6 to 10 per class, and some had over 20 peer mentors per class.
Okay, to get into these results a little bit, so our first research question was, what was the nature of these ensembles? Based on the results, we see that these types of ensembles are as varied as the students within them. We also noticed that a lot of the ensembles had a dedicated class period within the school day for the ensemble rehearsals, which means that they have very supportive administration probably, or even the music teacher themselves is willing to possibly give up teaching another class so that they can have these ensembles. We did also notice that a lot of the ensembles were fairly small, and this could be possibly due to the high level of differentiated instruction required. Just the various needs of the students in those settings means that maybe the teachers have to limit the size of the class just for practical reasons. or availability of resources such as curricular materials, instruments, or paraprofessional support. We also discovered that a high proportion of participants using instruments suggested that instruments may be more instructionally and developmentally appropriate in these settings than vocals alone. It's possible that instruments are easier to use and more adaptable for students with speech concerns. We also discovered that the public performances were varied. The type and frequency of performances, quote from one participant, depends on the students. So several of the participants noted that whether or not they even have a performance during the year or how that performance is structured depends on the students and the needs of the students from year to year. Moving on to our second research question, which was what type of pre-service and in-service training did these teachers receive to work with students with special needs? We noticed it was pretty clear that many teachers are still not getting general and or music specific preparation for working with students with special needs. So about half, I believe, were not getting general training, and even more than that, were not getting music specific training. Although the teachers in this study are pretty resourceful, because even though a lot of them were not receiving training, the vast majority of them sought out professional development opportunities on their own to gain those skills and knowledge to create these kinds of ensembles and work with this group of students. Our third question was what type of curricular materials were used and how were they developed? Very few of them used sheet music. There was also a multifaceted approach to obtaining and creating the materials. As you could see a few slides ago from the graph, teachers either got them online or developed them themselves or pieced together different components. And so that would suggest that teachers are kind of tailoring the instruction and the curricular materials to the specific students that are in their classes at any given year. We were thinking, though, that the lack of pre-existing materials could be a deterrent to starting an ensemble. It's possible that there are teachers out there who would be interested in starting an ensemble for students with special needs at their school, but see that there's no resources available at their school and maybe don't even know where to start. And that can be a big deterrent. It can seem like a major roadblock right off the bat. Our fourth and final research question was, what type of support did teachers receive in the form of paraprofessional and peer mentoring? The majority of them had at least one paraprofessional present, which is great because anytime there's an extra set of hands in the room, that's going to be helpful. But the research does show that arts-based training for paraprofessionals is inconsistent. It's possible that many paraprofessionals don't receive any training with how to help students in an arts-based setting. A lot of times, unfortunately, research shows that paraprofessionals are just kind of there observing and making sure students are behaving and things like that, but aren't necessarily able to actively help them engage in the musical process. Another thing that we saw was that more than half of the participants had at least one peer mentor present, which is great because, as we see from this article by Jellison, peer-assisted learning strategies are evidence-based practices that can lead to positive learning outcomes in inclusive music classrooms. So some implications that we have from this study, a very clear one is that music teacher preparation programs in the US need to work harder to increase their undergraduate exposure to working with students with special needs. Because as we mentioned, only half had general training for students with special needs and even less had preparation for working with special needs students in a music specific classroom setting. This could be either full courses within the curriculum or units within existing courses. It's really hard to fit new classes into a typical music education curriculum, but maybe if just units can be added into pre-existing classroom settings that address this topic, that would be helpful too. And because we saw that so many of the teachers were like finding out this information on their own outside of their undergraduate preparation, school districts and state and national conferences need to continue to offer sessions on this topic because clearly there's a need for it and teachers are seeking out those opportunities. Of course, our sample size limits our generalizability for this study. I think that would be one of our major limitations. 21 is not a very big sample size. However, I think that also tells us that maybe there aren't a lot of these types of ensembles out there to begin with, which is a really important finding on its own, we believe. In the future, we think that maybe a very similar study to this one could be expanded to get a bigger sample size so that results could possibly be more generalizable. And we can continue to gather descriptive data about these types of ensembles. We're also very interested in conducting an in-depth case study of a single institution that is, or a single secondary school that has an ensemble for students with special needs, just to do kind of an in-depth dig on how they've developed their curriculum, what their ensemble looks like. We think that that would prove really interesting in the future.
Thank you for coming. And if you guys have any questions, you see our emails on this slide. Feel free to email either of us. And we hope to see you in 2 years at the next conference.
Thank you.